Hi, everyone. We hope you guys are having a great day out there. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is Mr. Tiska with you once again. And once again, I'm joined by Mrs. Kraft. Mrs. Kraft, how are you today?
Doing well. How about you, Mr. Tiska?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking. We also have Ms. Hoff with us. Ms. Hoff, how are you?
I'm great.
Excellent. So today we're going to move on and we're going to talk about Chapter 3, Section 4, Life in the English Colonies. Now, the big idea for today is that the English colonies continued to grow despite many challenges.
And the main ideas that we're going to talk about are how colonial governments were influenced by political changes in England, English trade laws limited free trade in the colonies, and the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment led to the ideas of political equality among many colonists. You have to tune in to the next screencast to learn about the French and Indian War and how it gave England control of more land in North America. Main idea 1, colonial governments were influenced by political changes in England. So, each colony had its own government. However, the English monarchy still had final say in those governments. So, governors ruled the colonies with different assistants, and each government was given this power to rule by a charter. So you had royal colonies. In royal colonies, governors were elected by the monarchy and they had an advisory council. In proprietary colonies, all the officials were chosen by the proprietors of those colonies. And then you had a few colonies like Connecticut and Virginia, which we talked about in the last screencast, that were able to elect their own representatives. Now, Virginia has a two-part legislature. So this was the first colonial legislature in North America. Woo woo. So you had the Council of State, which was the governor's advisory council, and then the London Company, who chose the members. And then you had the second part, which is the House of Burgesses, and these were elected by the colonists. Another thing that you had in colonial government were a lot of town meetings. So especially in the New England colonies, these town meetings, people got together and they voted on different important issues and decided on different important issues at stake in the colony. So then you have James II in England. James II in England took over the English throne and he appointed Sir Andros to control the colonies. He says, "You're going to be in charge of the colonies over in the Americas. Here you go." The colonists, they hear about him, they hear some things from him, and they don't really like him that much. He was not well liked by the colonists. When Parliament replaced James II, they passed something called the English Bill of Rights in 1689. And the English Bill of Rights reduces the power of the monarch in the colonies. Colonial courts were used to control local affairs and protect individual rights, and you have John Peter Zenger, who won his court case and established the first freedom of the press in the colonies. Main idea 2, we're going to go to Mr. Tiska. English trade laws limited free trade in the colonies.
Yeah, so Parliament, which was England's government, they really looked at the colonies as a way to make money because England practiced mercantilism, which was a system of creating and maintaining wealth through carefully controlled trade. Now, the goal of this system was to import less than you export. Now, when you import something, that means you're bringing it into the country. That means you're buying it. It's goods that you buy and bring into the country. When you export, that means you're sending goods out of the country. So the goal is always to export more than you import. In other words, to sell more than you buy so that way you can make money. So in order to make sure that England was exporting more than it was importing, Parliament began to pass a series of laws known as the Navigation Act, which was a means to control trade. Now, some of the things that the Navigation Act said was, first of all, colonists could only trade sugar and cotton with England. Goods had to be transported on English ships, and all goods had to pass through English ports where taxes were added. Now, the colonists were against these laws because it limited how much money they can make. Think about it. How many of you guys like sugar? How many of you wear an article of clothing that is made from cotton? They're very popular items. So there were a lot of countries like Spain and the Netherlands that wanted access to all the cotton and sugar that the colonies were producing. But yet the colonies, even if, say, Spain and the Netherlands were offering more money than England was, they could not trade with them. They could only trade sugar and cotton with England. Now, eventually, England also passed the Molasses Act, which started taxing molasses. Molasses is a very sweet kind of syrup. And the colonists got so angry at that they started to smuggle. They started to secretly sell goods to other countries, which was illegal. Now, all of this, if we could scroll down a little bit, is going to be part of what's called the triangular trade, which is a three-part trade system involving the colonies, Great Britain, Africa, and the West Indies. And Ms. Hoff has a wonderful map right here where you guys can see. See how it forms a triangle because you have the three different points? So you see all of these goods are going to go from one place to the next. And this is how Parliament, this is how England made money, because it was a very important part of the triangular trade. Now, not only were goods like sugar and cotton traded as part of this system, but unfortunately, you also had people that were traded as well, because you had something called the Middle Passage, which involved millions and millions of Africans being transported from Africa to the Americas, and almost 20% of slaves died on the voyage. Now, I have a couple pictures that I want to show you guys real quick just to explain how that number was so high. I mean, look at this picture right here. This is normally how Africans would have been packed onto cargo ships. First of all, they were actually captured by their own people, and in some cases, they were forced to march almost 1,000 miles along the African coast to the docks after they were sold. And then if the ship wasn't there, they'd actually be placed in a dungeon until the ship arrived. And then once the ship arrived, they were taken below deck. And you can see here, look at all of these people just packed like cargo. So conditions were absolutely terrible. And a lot of them died from diseases that would spread. A lot of them died from starvation. So that's why that number of 20% of slaves died on the voyage. You're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And this is a system that's going to be maintained for decades and decades and decades, unfortunately.
Main idea 3, the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment led to ideas of political equality among many colonists.
So there was a man named Jonathan Edwards who was the leader of this Great Awakening. And he was trying to get people to really feel differently about the Bible than what the Puritans had done and the Christians had done at that point. And he gave something called fire and brimstone speeches, which is kind of like where the devil lives. So it would be those very scary, repent, you sinners! Change your ways or else the devil will come for you. So everybody was like, whoa. So it got everybody going in terms of, I better be leading a good life or bad things will happen to me. Now, George Whitefield gave these same kind of sermons, maybe a little less rah in your face, but he gave them in outdoor tents. So it was called like a tent revival. So what would happen is people would come from all different places. And when they would get there, they would say, hey, so how's things back where you live? And they're like, well, this is what's going on in my neighborhood. And then somebody else would say, well, this is what happens in mine. So people were now starting to share political ideas. Whereas before, you kind of kept to your own little piece of the world and you didn't know much about what was going on around you. Now, couple the Great Awakening and people moving around more to something called the Enlightenment. Now, prior to the Enlightenment, everything that you did, you had to do because the Bible said you had to do it. Now, all of a sudden, people are like talking about science. So it's not just, well, God did this. Now it's, well, there's scientific evidence about this. So now people are starting to question things that they just accept it as because it's in the Bible. So the idea that reason and logic could come into play instead of just being told what to do is a new idea for that time period. Like we all sit there and go, well, hello, it's logical. back then they didn't really rely on logic as much. And they actually started to question governments. Like when Ms. Hoff talked about the English Bill of Rights, they limited the power of the monarchy, which is the king. Now we have John Locke, who believes that people have natural rights, that you have the right to equality and liberty. So a lot of these new ideas are influencing all of the colonial leaders. And things are about to change even more greatly, but that's not until tomorrow that we tell you about the French and Indian War.
Yes. So for our next screencast, as Mrs. Kraft and Ms. Hoff have told you, we're going to really focus in on the French and Indian War. We're looking forward to that. Mrs. Kraft, anything else you want to add?
No, we're good.
Ms. Hoff, anything?
Nope. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.